Good afternoon. I am Adam Porter. I am chair of the Beverly Hills Bar Mediation section, and I am so pleased to welcome our speaker for this afternoon, Pepperdine Professor Emeritus Peter Robinson. Peter was the managing director of the Straus Institute at Pepperdine for many years. Prior to joining Pepperdine, Peter was the director of the Christian Conciliation Service of Los Angeles. Peter received his bachelor's degree in economics from UC San Diego and his law degree from Hastings College of the Law. And we're going to jump right into today's program where Peter will concentrate on the topic of forgiveness. Peter, thank you so much for joining us again.
Good. And Adam, I'm grateful for the work that you and others have put in to make this possible, and for your leadership of this community of mediators connected with the Beverly Hills Bar. And I just know that you are thinking and working actively to how do we advance practice and how do we help people learn more and serve better. So God bless you. Good.
Thank you.
All right. Again, this is a part two. I don't know how many of you were able to attend part one. We did a whole section on apology. All of this material comes from a class that I created at Pepperdine titled Apology, Forgiveness, and Reconciliation. And we covered the first half of it a couple months ago when we did a segment on apology. And now today I've been asked to come back and focus on forgiveness. I want to make sure you know that, please, I'm sharing with you the most salient concepts, but if you find yourself, wanting to go deeper, I wrote a textbook for my class, which is titled Apology, Forgiveness, and Reconciliation for Good Lawyers and Other Peacemakers. And the question, good, do I mean morally good, or do I mean shrewd? Do I mean effective? And I think it's both. And I think that lawyers who know how to manage and have vocabulary and technique for encouraging both apology and forgiveness serve their clients in a deeper way, in a more satisfying way, maybe more satisfying as far as being a lawyer. So let's jump into forgiveness today. And Adam and I have set this up. I believe that the chat room is open and that you have the ability to chat questions in, and that Adam will interrupt me when if you type a good enough question, then he'll say, Peter, stop. We have to talk about this. So if he doesn't stop me, then I'll just assume you guys are not typing the good enough questions. So
yeah, it'll be in the Q&A area.
In the Q&A.
Q&A area. So I will monitor that in the course of the afternoon.
Fantastic. Okay, well, we have an hour, and forgiveness is interesting. So let me, those of you who have been with me before, you know that I have a kind of an in-home classroom. I created a whiteboard where I can put my my white prompts. So I'm going to stand up now and go. I guess they call this a set change in the entertainment industry. We're going to do a set change as I put the computer on a ladder here and tie it in. And let me get the power cord.
Can we start with one quick question, Peter?
Sure.
Phyllis Pollock said she read your book and she's having trouble figuring out how one can reconcile and not forgive. Do you mind giving a brief explanation now, or would you like to give it later?
Sure. Who read the book?
Phyllis Pollock, one of the people in our section.
Okay, great, wonderful, good. I know Phyllis. Hi, Phyllis. And again, to me, I don't think you can reconcile without forgiveness. And by the way, let's remember, okay, I'm an econ undergrad major, and I went straight to law school. So I do not have a wealth of depth when it comes to mental health understanding. And that's why I love it whenever I have mental health professionals, comment and give feedback as far as the way that I've organized this. But in my mind, the way I've set it up is that apology is a unilateral act. If I've been a perpetrator, if I've offended someone, I have to decide. And one of the punchlines we had for that was, am I willing to tell the truth to myself and to others and to take responsibility? So for my mistake. So the fact is, perpetrators have to decide if they're willing to apologize, right? And by the way, the apology includes acknowledgement. It includes remorse. If it is a remorse apology, it includes the offer of an explanation, and it includes reparations. Our current environment here in Los Angeles with the secretly taped recording of the politicians, and some of them using pretty inappropriate language, and some of them have asked for forgiveness and what have. Again, the idea of, if I'm going to apologize, I need to take responsibility and just not ask for a free pass if I'm going to give a quality apology. So to me, that's what's. But if Phyllis, if you read the book, you know that I go out of my way to make sure that we know that there's like 4 other kinds of apologies. The remorse apology means that we have shared values. My behavior was inappropriate, but I might give a regret apology that said that I'm sorry I hurt you, but I think I did the right thing. I think I would do it the same way again. And there are situations in life where we have to take action that injures somebody. Somebody has to work on Christmas morning or something, and that person is imposed upon, but you were fair in how you spread out who has to work Christmas morning. Another type of apology is a social harmony apology. I'm just trying to help this. I care more about the relationship than I do about being right, and I'm just trying to get along. And then another kind of apology is a externally motivated. The only reason I'm apologizing is because I'm trying to avoid consequences. So notice with me when I say that reconciliation is a combination of a perpetrator apologizing, but we have to look at the type of apology. Is this a remorse apology, or is this just either externally motivated or social harmony? And now suddenly we can see why some reconciliations fall apart, because we haven't had, if you will, in law, we talk about a meeting of the minds. We haven't had a meeting of the hearts, to where, you know what, it's inappropriate for you to treat me that way. And the other person says, you know what, you're right, it is, and I'm sorry, and it won't happen. And will the behavior be repeated is another measure of a good apology. So if we have a quality apology, you don't have reconciliation. You just have one of the 2 people in the transaction taking responsibility for their mistakes, right? Now the second person has to decide, what am I going to do? Right? I've just been offered a quality apology. And frankly, as we'll see today, forgiveness is a very complex journey for many people. And sometimes it takes time. And but if we get to a place of a robust forgiveness, if we have a good apology and robust forgiveness, now these people can come back together again and have a mutually satisfying and healthy relationship. But we'll see that also that there are approaches to forgiveness that are also less than robust, that are so to me, how can we get reconciliation without forgiveness? I don't think you can, because you may have the perpetrator extending the olive branch and saying, I'm sorry, and I agree, I was wrong, right? But there are some people who say, you know what, thank you for the apology, but I can't be vulnerable to you again. That was too painful, too toxic. I'm going to build barriers, and I have to be self-protective here. And I think that there are times to where that's a wise decision. So I'm not critical. By the way, I'm not critical. One of the things for me is just to try to understand all the possible dynamics that are going on with apology and forgiveness. But when the planets align and you have a quality apology and a robust forgiveness, now suddenly these 2 people can re-engage in a way. So good question, Phyllis, and thanks for joining in. Good to know that you're here. I can't see it because I don't have that screen. Okay, let's take a look at forgiveness. And as we look at forgiveness, the first thing I want to ask is it an event or is it a process? I've heard some people say, they tell someone, last night I forgave you. So they're kind of referring to this tipping point to, oh, you know what, I connect the act of forgiveness with what happened last night when I was in the shower. And I realized that, whatever I realized, it caused me to say, okay, I'm going to let it go. I'm not going to fight it anymore. So sometimes it's an event. Many people say, no, for me, it's a process. So there's room, I think, for different personality types to handle it different ways as far as what. And when we're talking about forgiveness, for us to just acknowledge the complexity that it works differently for different people. That's all I'm asking for. I don't have the right answer. So, but is it a decision or is it a feeling? I've heard people say, you know what, I want to forgive you, but right now I am so angry at you that I can't. And they use feeling language as to describe why they can't forgive. And I've heard other people say, I'm madder than a wet cat at you. But the fact is, you know what, I have forgiven you, or I'm going to forgive you. There's a difference in those words, isn't there? But this whole idea of thinking, where does the forgiveness
impetus come from? Does it come from the head, a decision with your rational mind, or does it come from the heart and you're out of your emotions? And there you are just trying to, and again, I think that there is room for people to have different personalities and different parts of their personality that lead at different times. So fair enough. And then the other one is forgiveness unilateral or is it interdependent? I know some people say, I will never forgive unless there's an apology. It's just, that's just the way I'm wired. If someone wrongs me, I might be willing to forgive if there's an apology, but if there's no apology. So this idea, I know other people who say, you know what, I will forgive because I don't want to carry around the negativity of being bitter and hateful. I will forgive for my own well-being. And there's kind of, and frankly, sometimes the people who offended us will never apologize. They'll never admit they did anything wrong. Sometimes the people who offended us are either oblivious, sometimes they're dead. I think all of us who have been parents know that we made mistakes as parents, and therefore it's not hard for us to imagine that, hey, guess what? Our parents made mistakes too. And it's not uncommon for people to say, I'm so angry at my childhood. There were certain things that I should have received, I didn't receive. And now suddenly maybe the parents even passed on. And now that person has to ask themselves, if this is interdependent, my mom or dad never acknowledged the fact that the deficits in their parenting, right? Now, am I stuck feeling this way the rest of it? Or is there an option for me to make a decision to say, I'm going to go through some kind of forgiveness experience? It has nothing to do with mom and dad because mom and dad are gone. So there's the first question as we just kind of step back and say, let's try and get our arms around what are we dealing with here? And you may have other metrics that you would want to kind of include. If you do, I hope you put that into the Q&A or the chat somewhere so that I can consider whether I want to add that to my list as I have these talks. All right. There's still another definitional piece of saying, hey, have you thought about forgiveness, right? And I've come up with 3 other ways to say, what are the elements of forgiveness? Okay. And by the way, like I said, I'm an econ major, straight to law school. And therefore, when I decided that, at Pepperdine, we have 30 classes about dispute resolution. We have culture, we have communication, we have psychology, we have all this stuff. But I knew what was in all those classes. I was a part of getting those classes approved. So I knew what the content was. And I felt like we had missed the heart. And then I said, okay, so what is the heart of conflict resolution? And frankly, this is about healing. How do we help people heal from conflict? And then I just started reading everything I could find, and ended up landing on apology, forgiveness, and reconciliation. And I talked about apology, but so I'm reading all kinds of books about forgiveness. And I am a practicing Christian, and that's a big part of my life. But I didn't want this to be a Sunday school kind of thing. I wanted this to be an academic investigation of forgiveness from all different kinds of disciplines. So just so you know, what you're getting right now is my amalgamation of, my personal study of trying to understand these things and package them that I could teach them. So here are 3 elements of forgiveness. The first one is animus. When I say I forgive you, when you harm me, I might wish you harm. After someone treats you badly, you might say, you know what? I can't wait for karma or whatever to bite him in the butt. And you just look, you pray for his downfall because you're hurt and you're angry at him, right? Well, the opposite of that is that you wish someone well. And that you say, gosh, I really hope good things happen to that person's life. So when I say I forgive you, I think that I'm moving towards wishing a person well. I may not move all the way from wishing them ill to wishing them well, but I might say, I used to wish them, I used to pray that they would get hit by a bus, right? Now I'm kind of neutral. I'm not full of hostility, but frankly, I'm not full of love either. So I think these are all continuums, they're gradations. And here's one to step back and say, when you ask a person, have you thought about forgiving them? You might be asking them, well, one of the things I'm talking about is that whenever you talk about them, I can just hear the anger and the bitterness, and it's kind of, oh, okay, yeah. So there's animus as one element of forgiveness that might be measured, right? Well, here's another one. What about reparations? If you lend me $500, if I lend you $500, and then you don't pay me back, and then I run into you on the street corner and say, hey, I want you to know I forgave you for that, right? Does that mean that I don't want my $500 back? Is it so? Reparations, I want full reparations. I'm waiving reparations. I might give you a discount. And does forgiveness have to mean that I have waived my right to justice? Is it possible for me to construct, and notice the language I'm using, for me to construct some forgiveness experience for a particular situation that says that I'm going to forgive you, I'm not going to be mad at you anymore as far as animus, but I'd still expect you to fulfill your commitment, do the right thing. And there you are as far as thinking about reparations. Where does, in this particular situation, what do I mean when I say I forgive you as it relates to reparations? Okay. Well, the third thing is maybe the most complicated, and this goes back to Phyllis's questions, right? When I say I forgive you, what does that mean about the future relationship? If I forgive you, do I have to be vulnerable to you? Do I have to, because over here is I never want to see you again in my life. Over here, it's like, you know what? It's like the injury never happened. We're back to the same relationship that we had before you injured me. And that I not only love you, but I want to be part of your life, and I want to be vulnerable to you. And frankly, when you ask people about forgiveness, I think that they're thinking that it means that they have to let go of the bitterness, that they have to waive reparations, and that they have to be vulnerable again. And that's why some people say, I could never, right? And frankly, there are some situations where I would agree with them. That there are situations where I think it is healthy to say, I need to have some boundaries. You just embezzled money from the company. You know what? We're not going to prosecute you according to the law. We're not going to expect you to pay it back. We know that you can't pay it back. But you know what? We're going to change your job, and you're not going to have access to a company credit card anymore. You're not going to have access to company funds in any way. We just need to know that that's an area that you have many things you contribute, but that's one that is broken. So we're not going to do that anymore. So this idea of forgiveness, and again, in the extreme, I've been with people who said, you know what, I will forgive them, but I never want to see them again. It's toxic, it's dangerous. It's not healthy for me to see this person ever again. And then I know some people who say, you know what, in the middle, it's kind of like, I will forgive you. And what that means is that I'm going to be guarded. I will be watching you, and I will give you the chance, the opportunity to re-earn my trust. I'm not going to just, lay down my arms and be totally vulnerable and trusting with you, because I have reason I did that once and I got burned. I got reason to believe that it would be wise for me to be more cautious in the situation. But over time, if you demonstrate that, the way your bad actions, are being outweighed by lots of good behavior, I can see the needle getting closer and closer to being vulnerable again. And then again, there are some people who say, I forgive you. And so Phyllis's question about forgiveness and reconciliation is over here, that we are back connected. And notice with me, even in forgiveness, there are some people in some situations that might say, what, I'm willing to forgive as far as hostility, but I still want to have some protective boundaries in there. And I would say that is appropriate. And it also means that these folks aren't going to reconcile in a wholesome sense of the word. So there's some interesting things for us to think about as far as when we even contemplate for ourselves or encouraging others to forgive. What are we talking about here? And I hope that you. And by the way, the complexity is meant to help us customize a forgiveness, and we might not even want to use the F word, because forgiveness is so amorphous that it could mean so many things that it might just scare people away. We might find other language to talk about things that are to encourage people down some kind of a forgiveness experience, but not call it forgiveness. So, okay, here we go. So as I think about mediators and lawyers and encouraging forgiveness, there's a big factor here, and asks, who initiates this conversation and when? And as far as who initiates, it could either be initiated by a client or it could be initiated by the attorney. right? And I'll just interchange attorney and mediator. Frankly, I think it's easier for mediators because the attorney is requested to participate in this conflict as a protector, and when your protector says, hey, what about forgiveness, they might feel kind of like, time out here, you're supposed to be on my side, you're supposed to be fighting against them, you're not supposed to be challenging me to go through something. So the attorney, it's a little more awkward, but for a mediator, I think it's more consistent with the role expectations that the mediator is going to try and encourage us to play nice with each other. So in any event, who's going to initiate this? So, and then when, early in the case, in the middle of the case, or at the end of the case. It creates this matrix here. So early in the case, the client may walk in and say, I'm so angry, he never apologized. No one, and your client is hurting, and comes in at your office and frankly shares a very, very raw emotions about what it felt like to be violated the way they were violated, right? And now the question is, if the client says that, early in the case, the lawyer or the mediator might want to talk about the limits of the legal system. Mr. Smith, I want to make sure that you understand that, you have been violated. You were probably discriminated against on an unlawful basis. You should have gotten that promotion. And you know what? This looks like a very strong legal case. But I also want to make sure that before I take your case, that you understand the limits of the legal system, and that the legal system looks at what happened to you, and sees whether in fact people have crossed the legal line, and if they have, how much compensation. At the end of this, you get a check. If you're thinking that they're going to in the middle or the end of this say, oh gosh, now we realize we behaved badly, we're very sorry. That's very rare in our legal system. The society quantifies all of this in dollars and cents, and all of the emotional anger that I want you to hear, that I'm hearing you speak about. I want to make sure that you know that is not usually attended to, and that you need to be thinking about some plan about that. I'll get you the money you're legally entitled to, but I cannot deliver an apology or recognition or acknowledgement, or so I just want to make sure that you know that that's part of our legal system, this adversarial system that we have. But notice it was a client who opened the door by now again, some lawyers may decide at the very beginning of the case, and the intake interview, to say, you know what, I want you to know, I want the attorney might ask for permission to encourage emotional recovery. Even before the client has this outburst of all these raw emotions, the attorney might say, I want to let you know that, what you have been through, you have suffered an emotional harm and a financial harm. And I'm well qualified and have a strong track record of getting people their financial compensation that they're legally entitled to. But I want to make sure you know that my approach to the practice of law is to always encourage my clients to, not always, I don't have to, but I'd like your permission, because I think it works best if you allow me to encourage you to be thinking about your emotional recovery. I'm not qualified, but there are mental health people, there are other resources in your support system that you might need help talking through this thing and thinking about, how long am I going to be angry and bitter and hostile, and how's that working for you? So some lawyers might actually be the one who initiates the conversation and says, in my experience, people that have been through the kinds of cases that I had, a friend who did a lot of, he called them bad baby cases, and families whose children were born with in a compromised way, and maybe the doctor didn't do everything right, and you've got this incredibly emotional situation, and for the lawyer to acknowledge that it's there and to ask the client's permission to say, I would like to have your permission to ask how you're doing as far as your emotional recovery, because you don't need to wait for the case to be over. You can start trying to figure out, and by the way, it might be slow steps over a long period of time, but I just hope that you're aware of the fact that you've been damaged emotionally as well as financially. Okay, how about the middle of the case, right? And again, in the middle of the case, the client again has an outburst and says, you know what, this is so maddening. These people are asking all these questions, but no one seems like they really care about how this affected me. And of course they do, because but the fact is, I just feel like this is just turning into dollars and cents. And again, for the lawyer to respond to the client and talk about this two-track approach to healing, one of them financial, one of them emotional, and to encourage the client to say, you know what, you do need to instruct something that you're going to do to help yourself recover emotionally. And I want to encourage you to start that process, because check this out. In the middle of the case, the attorney might want to bring up the conversation about forgiveness. I've had more than a few very successful plaintiffs' attorneys, trial attorneys. When I say very successful, I mean these people who have billboards that say, more than $100 million recovered for our clients. And they tell me, Peter, juries and judges don't like victims. That I'm representing the plaintiff, and they have been victimized in some way, but in their deposition or if we get to trial, if they start telling their story and their story is a victim story, it's not the best for them, as compared to if they can have some measure of emotional healing and perspective to where they can discuss their situation and talk about surviving the hardship and talk about how they had to recover, and frankly, they're more likable, more respected, because they were not victimized the rest of their life over this situation. So there are some lawyers who say, you know what, you will be more likable as a witness if I can take you off of your rant and get you to discuss what happened to you honestly, including the emotional pain that you had, but with a little more emotional distance as compared to being raw. So there's another moment in a case where maybe the lawyer might want to challenge the client as to how he's being perceived. And then, of course, at the end of the case, maybe the client brings up, you know what, this is great, and there's a lot of money, and I know it, and I really appreciate it, but it just still bothers me that they never said they're sorry. And I imagine many of you have heard that as lawyers, and maybe you just kind of say, yeah, life's hard, and I hope the money helps you recover and get back on your feet. But again, you might say, you know what, the legal system gives you the money. You still need to do the inner work of trying to figure out how to emotionally recover, how to make your peace with the deck of cards that life has handed you, and for you to still be the person that you want to be. And I pray that it won't be, I don't know if it's a month or a year, but I pray that down the path, you'll realize that you're no longer an angry, bitter person over what happened to you. What happened to you does not define your life anymore. It is certainly an important incident in your life, but now your life is all about what you're going to do after that incident, as compared to getting stuck in that incident. I want you to know, I tend to talk about forgiveness from the plaintiff's attorney's perspective. But I've had some defense lawyers say, Peter, you don't understand. The defendant lawyers also need to be fluent in forgiveness language, because, and again, the most memorable of these was an in-house lawyer who says that, man, the executives of my company get really angry and hurt when we get sued, especially if an employee alleges things that the company doesn't believe is true, and so the idea that the defense lawyer might need to talk to his or her client about not going on a rant and controlling your emotions, and not only controlling, but hopefully attending to your emotions to where you are getting to a better place. And of course, the exit interview, I think that the other thing that the lawyer might do at the end of the case is to share with the client, I've represented a lot of people who've gone through the kind of tragedy that you've gone through. I'm thinking about the bad baby cases again. I want you to know, I've seen some of them recover. I've been aware of what's happened to them after the case is over, and that sure enough, a couple years later, they have recovered and are living happy and full lives. I've seen some of the clients I've represented, have not recovered, and this tragedy defines their life for the foreseeable future, for maybe forever. And I'd like to share with you some of the things that the people who've recovered have done. Now, not all these things might make sense to you right now, but I'm hoping to plant a seed that when you're ready, that you might think about some of the things that I've seen some of my clients do that I think has helped them be the kind of people who recover. So there's another moment in looking at lawyers and okay. Why is it hard to encourage another person to apologize, to forgive? Because we have to respect grief and timing. Everything I've read about forgiveness says that when you have been violated, anger is a healthy response. You should be angry. You should have some righteous indignation that says, "How dare them treat me this way? This is unjust and unfair." And you should have a loud voice that protects yourself. And then some of the way people approach and write about apology talk about almost like a grief process. Ross Kubler popularized this kind of progression of emotional stages or psychological stages when you're going through grief. And frankly, maybe there's a parallel between forgiveness for some people and grief, a forgiveness process and a grief process. Because in a sense, forgiveness is grieving. I thought that I worked for a company that was decent and treated people honestly and fair. And now I just found out that this place is a rat house. These people are disgusting. And frankly, what I have to grieve is the fact that I thought my employer was honorable, and now I perceive that he's not honorable. Something died there. I used to have pride in being a part of this community that worked here, and now I'm disgusted, and suddenly I might have to go through some of those things, anger, bargaining, those stages of and at the end of it, then we accept it. So it's important for us to respect grief and also to respect timing. Some people, I'll just let you know, in my marriage, early in my marriage, my wife and I figured out that I don't like it when we're not getting along. And when we're not getting along, we have a conversation, we do our best to patch things up and affirm love for each other. And when we're done with that, I say, okay, are we okay now? Are we good? Right? And my wife says, Pete, you can turn on a dime from being mad to being, okay, we're good now. Just so that's not how it works for me. I need some time just to kind of live with it for a while before I can say that we're good. Say, okay, and there we are. Some people might be able to very quickly go from victim to non-victim, and other people might say, you know what, it's more of a slow-moving train for me. So for us to respect the fact that we don't know where the other person is in their journey, in their forgiveness journey. They may still be at the embarkation station saying, you know what, I'm not even on the train yet. I'm just wallowing in the injustice that was perpetrated on me. And there might be other people that have begun to think and started to move, and as we try to encourage people just to make progress towards forgiveness, would be the way I would encourage for us to, as either mediators or attorneys, to think about it. We need to know that I have to respect the fact that this person has been violated. There's maybe a grief-like process, and that I don't know what their timing is like, and I need to respect that everyone gets to pick their own timing. I'll tell you that we went up to a family camp up in the San Bernardino Mountains many years ago. My wife's mother died about a month before we went up to this camp, and it was all paid for and reserved. So we still went to the camp, but we just knew that we were. She died unexpectedly, and while we were up at the camp, they had kind of a big family dining room thing, and they made the announcement that we have a couple of mental health professionals, and if anyone wants to after lunch, you can have a session with the mental health professionals. So I looked at Vic and said, "Hey, Vic, you know what? Why don't we go and talk about how about grief?" And my wife doesn't usually like that kind of, she's like, oh, brother, do we have to? I go, I think it might be good. So we went. And it was funny because as Vicky described her mom's unexpected death, it was a husband and wife therapist team, and the wife said, you know what, I want you to know that my mom died a few years ago, and I know that my friends were well-meaning, but at some point, I don't know if it was a month or 6 months or a year, but at some point they would come up to me and say, are you over it yet? And she says, they don't understand that you're never over it. It's always a part of your life that you're missing that person. And my wife said, yes, that's exactly right. And I thought to myself, man, am I ever glad we came to this session, because I definitely would have been one of those people that would have said, are you over it yet? And now I know I'm never going to ask that question, because we're never over it. This is always a part of it. So there we are, respecting the sense of the person who's suffering, their sense of timing. Okay. All right, so now this whole idea, and I've already, as we talked about some of the other charts, recognizing two dimensions, the financial recovery and the emotional recovery. And don't forget, here I'm talking about, I've taken forgiveness and rephrased it into emotional recovery. And don't forget, I'm also talking about healing. I'm looking for other phrases because forgiveness just feels bigger than life. And how do we swallow that bite of the meat? So my question is, should a mediator or an attorney, should they encourage emotional recovery and healing? Is that part of our job? And I want you to know, that's an individual choice. I know many mediators who say, listen, Peter, it's hard enough just to get the case settled. Thank you very much. And get people to agree on a number. And I know, in fact, I had a friend who said, Peter, I'm going to stop doing the court annex cases. I said, why? He says, because, the people come into my office and they hate each other. And we spend 3 or 4 hours and we reach an agreement. But then as we're winding things down, one of them says, could you please arrange for us to have staggered leaving times? And the mediator says, well, I can arrange that, but why? He goes, well, I don't want to see that SOB in the elevator or the parking garage. I never want to see him again. And the mediator feels defeated, because here's a mediator that had a vision for mediation, that this was going to be about helping people reconcile, about helping people get over their disputes enough that they could at least be in the same elevator and be civil. And that he had enough of these cases where people settled their lawsuit but still hated each other, that he felt like, this is not the kind of mediations I want to be doing. I need to find another outlet. So some mediators, and I know some mediators who dive in on this kind of stuff and say, I hope I can help people do that. And other mediators who don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. And frankly, I hope that you'll be, well, I would encourage you. My approach is to ask people if they would like to explore any of that. And if they say, no, thank you, I'll respect that. But if they say, yeah, I'd like that very much, especially if they have long-term relationships, either employer-employee or family or something, to where they know each other very well. And right now, being estranged is painful. Okay. So for us to be aware of the fact that there's these two dimensions, and to ask if they would like us to stick our nose into that business, or just to leave it alone, and then respect their wishes. All right. Okay. So let's take a look here. So as we think about attorneys or mediators advising forgiveness, 2 variables: how much rapport do we have, and was the advice requested? So notice with me, if we have a lot, plus, minus. If we have a lot of rapport and someone asks for your advice, I think we advise freely, right? And likewise, if we don't have rapport and no one asks for advice, I don't think we should give it. A good friend of mine, Jim Craven, mediator up in Spokane, about, I don't know, 10, 15 years older than me, as my kids were becoming adults, he just accidentally shared with me that he and his wife had an approach that said, you know what, we're not going to give advice unless to our adult children, unless they request it. And I tell people I've bitten my tongue enough that I'm surprised I can still talk. So this idea that if, here we have high rapport, but if our kids don't ask permission, don't ask for advice, we're not going to give it. And if both of these things are missing, we're not going to advise. Notice if we have no rapport, little rapport, but the advice is still requested, now I suggest we advise cautiously. Why? Because I don't have rapport. It is such a personal part of life here that if there isn't rapport, we need to tread carefully. And likewise, what if I have a lot of rapport, but they didn't ask? And now the most I think we should do is ask permission. Can I give you feedback as far as part of what I'm experiencing as you talk about this car accident and how it's affected you? And if they say, sure, I'd love your feedback. Well, okay, game on, let's go. But if they say, I don't really think I need to invite you into that part of my life. Okay, I have self-control. I don't need to share everything I think. So, all right, fair enough. All right, so here's another variable as we think about our role of helping other people think about forgiveness. Notice this one. I like this because I think mediators especially do a lot of helping people realize their options, right? And here are a construct. You may have either different words or add to the construct, but here's a construct that says, what are your options after an unfair injury? It's important to make sure that when we're talking about forgiveness, we know that this is supposed to be for an unfair injury. And one of the authors says there's a big difference between losing a $50 bet that was a fair bet, right, and getting mugged for $50, right? If you're getting mugged for $50, that's an unfair injury, right? If you made a fair bet and lost, there's nothing, you don't need to go through any forgiveness. You just have to accept the fact that you picked the wrong team or something. So notice with me, options after an unfair injury, something that we'd all agree, that shouldn't have happened, that they weren't treated right. So notice with me, one of the options is revenge. You hurt me, I'll hurt you right back, right? And we try to find a way to impose pain on the other person. So now again, it's interesting. Some of the psychological studies say that revenge is not as satisfying as people think it will be. If they could hurt the person as badly as they were hurt, they feel like, well, there we go. Now I can let go of this and feel better. And some of the psychological studies say that it's surprising. And the reason that the person doesn't feel better is because he has continued to live the injury to the point of revenge, and maybe afterwards. He's still defined, he's still in that paradigm of, on June 2nd, he did such and such to me, on July 3rd, I had a chance to repay the favor. And I'm still caught in this whole drama of being injured. So revenge is one option, right? Most of us and our clients, I would imagine, are smart enough to know that, if I go down that path, I could get myself in legal trouble. That's not socially appropriate. So the fact is, I'll just sulk. I'll just be sad. I'm smarter than to act on my desire for revenge, but I can emotionally punch the other person by letting them know how sad I am because of how they treated me, and for me to just be hurt and to decide that, oh, by the way, what's the advantage of being a victim? Because the person who sulks is essentially saying, I'll just stay the victim, right? What's the advantage of being the victim? You get emotional support from people around you. So that, think of a friend who was a great person, a great spouse, that yet for whatever reason, their spouse was unfaithful and the marriage ended, right? And you stand back, and when you get the phone call, say, yeah, my spouse just left. You think, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And, let's go out to lunch tomorrow. I want and there you are being emotionally supportive as a good friend should be, right? But the fact is that emotional support people get fatigued at some point, and depending on how terrible the incident was, I don't know if it's a month or 6 months or a year or 2 years, but at some point it's kind of like, what, I don't want to spend time with that person. Every time I do, all they talk about is, the divorce. I had a friend who I actually called a brother-in-law. So he and my sister got divorced, and I called him because he knows a lot about real estate, and I had a real estate situation. I wanted to get his input on that, right? I called him 10 years after my sister's divorce. right? And he picked up the phone. Oh, great to hear from you. Yeah, yeah. And then all he could do was talk about the divorce. I never asked him my real estate question. I just let him tell me how, but I got off the phone thinking, man, 10 years later, and, I didn't know better. I think it was yesterday. He's still in such a raw state overall. He has not recovered from it. So the idea that and there's another advantage of being the victim of sulking is that you have the moral high ground. Right. Notice if I do revenge, I'm perpetuating the evil behavior. He did evil to me, I'll do evil back. And now suddenly I'm a perpetrator as much as he is. And I've lost the moral high ground. But if I just restrain myself and just sulk, and then it's kind of like, wow, Pete was a great guy, and boy, his wife, what a jerk. And so, okay, there you go. So there's revenge and there's sulk, right? And then there's forgive. I like to put these up there because if something terrible, if there's some tragedy in your life, what are you going to do? And for you to realize, well, I don't want to forgive. Okay, I don't blame you. Forgive's high mountain to climb. Okay, so what's your other options? And I think many of us as mediators like to help people think through their options. And I go, well, I don't know. I guess I'll just stay like this. Okay, so you're just going to stay in this stage of victimhood, and this day, are you going to start a gentle path of recovery? No, I think my goal is be just like I am right now for the next 10 years and beyond. It's kind of like, okay, well, it's your life. You get to make those choices. But I think sometimes to think forgiveness is hard, but when you look at the other options, all of them have their advantages and disadvantages. Fair enough? Okay, now I want to take a look at 3 models of forgiveness. And this is important because as I was doing my investigation of forgiveness, I'm reading all these books, and I got to tell you, I taught the class for a couple of years before I finally read a book that explained to me the confusion of what I was reading. And a book finally explained to me that there's 3 different paradigms of forgiveness, 3 whole different approaches, 3 different assumptions about what forgiveness is all about, and definitions and how to do it. And now I want to share with you those 3 models, because as you're working with your clients about what are you going to do with the feelings you have right now, here are 3 pathways that might empower you with language and technique. The first one is therapeutic forgiveness. Fred Luskin wrote the book Forgive for Good. Luskin is a psychologist. He's the professor who leads the Stanford Forgiveness Project. And this model of forgiveness he describes in that book it's for the victim's healing. It has nothing, this is unilateral, has nothing to do with the perpetrator. The perpetrator may never recognize that they treated you poorly. It doesn't matter. The victim decides that they want to forgive because they don't want to be broken. They don't want to be burdened by the tragedy. We can't change the past, but we can change the future. I'm going to forgive so that eventually when I get complete with the forgiveness process, I can be happy. During this part of the class, I usually show a film titled "Forgiving Dr. Mengele." Eva Kor is the star of the film, and she was in Auschwitz as a young girl, but she was a twin, so the rest of her family was killed. But Mengele was doing medical experiments on twins. She ended up surviving, and in her 60s, she came to a realization and said, "You know what? They freed me from the concentration camp physically, but I was still a prisoner mentally and emotionally for the last 50 years. And in her 60s, she decided that she would forgive the Germans and the Nazis and Mengele, not because they deserved it, but because she was tired of being a victim. So here we go. The victim chooses to suffer less. In this model of forgiveness. Really, and I want you to know, Luskin does a great job of describing the physical ways that unforgiveness ruins your body and is unhealthy for you. Okay, how? He gives us 3 ideas. We have to take responsibility for our feelings. I want to let you know, this was new news for me as an econ lawyer person. And in all the mediation training I'd ever taken always says you just have to accept people's feelings for whatever they are. And now here's a psychologist telling me that people need to take responsibility for your feelings. And the idea is this, that we have responsibility for the remote control of our mind. What are we thinking about? What are we focusing on? And that if I'm focusing on my employer and how more qualified I was than the other person, and I'm focusing on building my case about my injustice, you know, then my feelings will be negative. I'll be angry. I'll be bitter. I'm living in the injury, right? But if I choose to say, you know what, I need to think about that some because that's part of my life. This is not denying. Forgiveness is not denying the past. You know, the forgiveness is to be intellectually honest with the past. Okay, and the fact is, these bad things did happen to me. But you know what? I am going to also, I'm going to purposefully seek positive things to put into my mind. He's a professor at Stanford. He says he'll take a drive down to Big Sur and look at the majesty of nature and realize that whatever problems there are that he's dealing with in his life, you know what, when you look at the grandeur of nature, puts it in perspective, and it's maybe not as important as he thought it was. Says he'll go to places where he will see people, families loving each other. He talks about going to hospitals and seeing a sick family member and seeing the support team out in the waiting room and how much they are concerned and care and loving. And he will look for places where he can experience healthy humans loving and caring for each other as compared to broken humans hurting each other. And that will change. So taking responsibility for your feelings, ask yourself, you know, okay, I got divorced 3 years ago. How much of my week, how many hours of my week do I think about that creep that left me, and how she left me, and how often do I relive it? And he says, you have control over what you think about, and you need to stop it. Okay, some of you might remember the Bob Newhart video clip, Stop It. Anyways, okay, take responsibility for your feelings. Hold on. His second suggestion is to release your unenforceable rules. That many of us have rules of how we expect other people, how we demand other people treat us. People have to tell me the truth. People have to, and then Phil, my spouse has to be faithful. My employees must be honest. And we have all these rules that they're unenforceable because why? Because they involve other people. And other people get to decide the rules they're going to live by. So he just says that if I make these rules and then other people don't live up to them, it is devastating, and it knocks me off my path, right? And he says that just a subtle semantic, right, to change a demand into a hope. I hope my employees will be honest. That subtle change means that I acknowledge the fact that some of them may not be honest. And when they're not honest, it's not devastating. It's like, well, I knew that was a possibility. And I still remember my long-term goal, and I can still be on a path to accomplish my long-term goal, even though some of the things that I wish wouldn't have happened did happen. So this idea of taking responsibility for your unenforceable rules, when people hurt you, don't take it so personally. People are just people, right? And finally, Luskin says, create a hero story instead of a victim story. And he says, when you tell your story, what percentage of it is talking about the victimhood that you experienced, and what percentage of it is talking about how you recovered? Man, the company was, really on the ropes. I had to work day and night for 3 years. We finally paid off all the people that we had to pay off, and now then we could start to actually be profitable again. It was the hardest 3 years of my life, but you know what, we did it because I love this kind of work, and frankly, I didn't want my clients to suffer from something that one of my employees did. So I just worked hard to make it right, and there you are talking about being a hero and recovering as compared to telling a story. And Luskin says the most important story you tell is to yourself. So there's a model of forgiveness that is all about helping the victim say, I don't want to be a victim anymore. I want to heal. Notice when Phyllis says, Peter, can we reconcile without forgiveness? Well, I want you to know, I think a person can do therapeutic forgiveness and not reconcile. I can decide that I don't want to be a bitter, angry person, but you know what?
don't want anything to do with you. Thank you very much. I'm just like at the core, I didn't want to, embrace the Nazis, but she wasn't going to let them define her anymore. So in any event, this is an approach to forgiveness that is less than relational. But frankly, it's very helpful. And I like to teach it first because it's the lowest hanging fruit. Do it for your own well-being. Do it for your own mental health. Okay, let's take a look at another whole model of forgiveness. This is relational forgiveness. This one, in fact, this forgiveness is reconciliation. There are some people who write and teach about forgiveness that say that if you don't restore the relationship, it's not forgiveness. Call it something else, but it's not forgiveness, right? Forgiveness must be to restore the relationship, according to this definition. One of the fascinating things that these people write about is that there can be no one way or one up forgiveness. One way is when I say, I forgive you. One up is when I forgive you. And it's illustrated by the story of a couple going through therapy. The husband's been unfaithful. He begs the wife to forgive him, and she says, no, I can't forgive you. And the husband thinks the marriage is over, and he's saddened by that. But then she explains, if I forgive you, I will always be the saint, and you will always be the scoundrel. You will be the screw up. And for the rest of our marriage, you know what? You'll always owe me one because you had the affair. So the fact is, I don't want to be in that kind of a marriage. I want to be in a mutual marriage, a reciprocal marriage. So the fact is, one up forgiveness, one way forgiveness is a superiority trip. And in this model of forgiveness, the idea is that both of the people in the marriage are going to think about what were the decisions and the actions I did that helped our marriage either thrive or suffer, and let me take responsibility. And therefore, I am going to forgive you, but I also hope you'll forgive me, and I need to forgive myself, and you need to forgive yourself. And now suddenly we have more of a holistic thing. How do we do this? Well, one of the easy ways is just to tell a more complicated story. When we have a victimhood, you know what, man, my boss came in here and screamed and yelled at me. That's unprofessional. I can't believe that. And notice I'm defining the conflict in a 3-minute time frame, right? Well, if we expand the time frame, Pete, why do you think your boss did that? Well, it's the third time I made this mistake. He told me yesterday he makes sure I don't make it today. And suddenly, if I just expand it 24 hours, much less 2 months. So the fact is that and by the way, sometimes when we do this, we realize that let's expand the time frame to realize that, guess what? This person may be a jerk because of their life experiences. And maybe this is the environment they grew up in. Maybe this is the culture that was normal for them. And suddenly what we see as insensitive and inappropriate, maybe we step back and look at their context and realize, okay, it's not surprising that he or she reacts this way. All right. Also to think about the allies and the supporters who, this person did this, who allows us to keep going on? Well, in fact, those who either knew about it or should have known and prevented it. My couple of my kids are nurses, and different times they tell me about different places to where the nurses don't do. They did an externship at the VA, right? And they said, the nurses don't do their jobs, and it's not because they're busy; they're lazy. And the bandage is supposed to get changed every blank hours, and they just don't do it. And to me, it makes me very sad. It makes me angry at the nurse who's getting her paycheck and not working her 8 hours or 12 hours, whatever it might be, right? But it also makes me mad because somebody has a job that's supposed to be supervising those nurses. And where are they? What are they doing? Why aren't they noticing? So in any event, there you go. Okay, let's take a look at, so here's another whole model of forgiveness. If you like this, Tian Dayton wrote a book titled The Magic of Forgiveness. Tian Dayton is a mental health professional. She actually wrote about forgiveness in the context of menopause. So I summarize her method usually, but the fact is she has a wonderful step-by-step method. It starts with waking up, realizing that my anger and bitterness is not worth the cost. This is just dragging me down. And then you go through pain and sorrow and back to some of those grief kinds of things. And she says that forgiveness is actually a byproduct of going through the process of attaching
the injury, attaching the feelings to the injury. And she says, if we don't do this, we run the danger of having all these negative feelings. And if we don't attach them to actually what caused them, then the fact is future relationships may have to bear the burden of them. Okay, interesting, another whole approach to forgiveness. The third approach is redemptive forgiveness. And here's a approach to forgiveness to say, I want to live my beliefs. I have lots of students at Pepperdine and say, Robinson, I'm not a religious person. I didn't grow up with any sacred text. And I say, you know what, you still have a belief system. And many people have a belief system that says, you know what, forgiveness is a virtue. Again, in scripture, in Christianity, we have the Lord's Prayer, we have the merciful servant. I think all the world religions, you know, uphold forgiveness as a virtue. So how? Well, some people decide with their head that they're going to do with, you know, don't forget feelings. So they're going to decide and they're going to commit to forgive despite their feelings. And they're going to trust that their feelings will follow, right? Anger is healthy, but it does not improve with time. And when have we allowed ourselves to hold on to our anger too long? Meditate on how much God has done for you and how much he's forgiven you. And now instead of making a decision to forgive, I'm actually manipulating. Don't forget what Luskin said about what are you focusing on. If I'm focusing on how much God has forgiven me, then maybe, you know, my feelings, I am taking responsibility for my feelings, and I actually feel like forgiving. Sometimes some of us say, I have to remember that I'm not qualified to judge. I don't know this person's childhood. I don't know what happened to him yesterday. I don't know what happened. He's got a 16-year-old kid who's going through some crazy. So the fact is, let me end with this. This is the Do It Anyway poem. It is was on the wall of the convent in Calcutta with Mother Teresa's group. So it's known as Mother Teresa's Do It Anyway poem. It's a little complicated because almost all of it she didn't create. It was written by a student at Harvard. And so therefore we have a saint who essentially stole a poem. So, but I'll let you sort through that on your own. But here's the punchline for redemptive forgiveness. Okay. People are often unreasonable, illogical, and self-centered. Forgive them anyway. If you are kind, people may accuse you of selfishness or ulterior motives. Be kind anyway. If you are successful, you will win some false friends and some true enemies. Succeed anyway. Let me turn that off. Succeed anyway. If you are honest and frank, people may cheat you. Be honest and frank anyway. If you spend years, what you spend years building, someone could destroy overnight. Build anyway. If you find serenity and happiness, they may be jealous. Be happy anyway. The good you do today, people will often forget tomorrow. Do good anyway. Give to the world the best you have, and it will never be enough. Give the world the best you've got anyway. You see, in the final analysis, it's between you and your God. It was never between you and them anyway. And there's that idea of saying, you know what? I want to live consistent with my values, be they religious or ethics or whatever it might be. But this is the kind of human being I want to be and how I want to use my time on earth. I hope that this has given you some language and some thinking that you might be able to use with different people, either as an advocate or as a mediator, and that you can help encourage this healing that we all need. So with that said, I will thank Adam again and let him close us down.
There was a question with the name of your book, Peter. So Professor Robinson's book is called Apology, Forgiveness, and Reconciliation for Good Lawyers and Other Peacemakers. Peter, thank you so much. I am most grateful for you for coming back and giving a follow-up talk. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Again.